Russia has assumed that the rear is safe from attack. Anywhere up to 2,000 miles into Russia is now a target for Ukraine. This has sort of changed the dynamic completely. It is changing the battle. In Crimea, you can't buy fuel. Fights on forecourts of garages. The sort of head of the Russian snake is being chopped off from its body by these deep strikes. Well, I think this was an extraordinary operation that Ukrainian drones and a lot of these deep strike operations are controlled by the Ukrainian Secret Service, the SBU, and is transforming the way that we fight. When you look at when you sort of analyze the details, it's remarkable, as you say, 12 hours of flight over about 1,500 miles. And what I understand, it probably took about a week for the route of this drone to be worked out by specialists back in Ukraine, designed to avoid um, Russian air defenses and to make sure that it went to places where the Russians couldn't pick it up. Because these drones are fairly slow moving, 12 hours to go that distance. They're only doing about 500 miles an hour. So when there are ballistic missiles and hypersonic missiles about, this is quite remarkable. And Omsk, the fuel refinery that it hit, is well out of the way. Now, in the past, the Russia has assumed that the rear is safe from attack, but this has sort of changed the dynamic completely. And this is what the Ukrainians are calling an FP1 drone. They reckon it has a range up to 2,000 miles. So, further another 500 kilometers. One area we understand the Russians are really concerned about is the Yamal gas plant in Siberia, which is the biggest gas plant that the Russians have got. If that was hit, that would really bring things to a standstill. But going back to the FPV-1 drone, these are made in Ukraine. It's an organic capability. We understand they're making 200 a day. I mean, this is a phenomenal amount. And they only cost about $50,000, £35,000. I mean, this is dirt cheap when you look at the damage that they're causing. And one of the issues that Russia is struggling with is that this was probably one of 100 or so drones that was released. Ukrainians say they're firing hundreds of drones every night, and it's really to swamp the Russian air defense system. And this proves that that's exactly what it's done. Now, when you look at the sort of some missiles Russia's firing, these are $5-10 million a pop. So again, we've got on the one side really cheap, really effective, and the FP1 has a fairly small warhead, only about 550 to 100 kilograms. But again, it's incendiary. In other words, it's designed to set things on fire, like it did the Omsk oil refinery. Now, this is just one of a number of things. The other organic capability that Ukraine's now using a great deal is their Flamingo cruise missile. So also over the last few days, they've been firing this cruise missile at Volgograd, creating a heck of a lot of damage and destroying a Russian munitions factory. Again, this is slightly different. It has a big warhead, 1,000 kilograms, a ton, travels, same sort of speed as the FP1, but it's a cruise missile, again, designed to hug the airspace so it can be avoided. It highlights two really key issues. First of all, Russian air defense. We understand that Russia even launched its Sukhoi 57 fighters, the latest fighters, to try and knock these drones down, and they couldn't. So that's a big deal. And the other element is that it's very clear that Russian air defense is focused around Moscow and St. Petersburg, protecting Putin's friends and elite. And this is creating real angst in the rest of Russia. And I suppose the final bit to it is, how are these drones finding their way to their targets? Well, we understand that, it's predominantly American and also British intelligence that is supporting them. So I think it is a small drone that is having a strategic impact. It is changing the battle. the amount of dissent that we understand coming out of Russia at the moment is incredible. You know, in Crimea, you can't buy fuel even if you want it. There's stories across Russia of fights on forecourts of garages where if you can get fuel, it's a very expensive and creating issues. And military bloggers in Russia and civilian bloggers, are all getting exasperated by this. So we're talking about one incident, an FPV-1 drone that's gone a great distance and set a refinery on fire. But actually, it's a much bigger picture where the sort of head of the Russian snake is being chopped off from its body by these deep strikes, quite apart from what's happening on the front line, which is putting the Ukrainians in a really strong position. And let's hope it's the precursor for ceasefire and negotiations, as Putin is clearly struggling to maintain his power, and the Russian people are clearly running out of patience. I think there are a whole host of reasons why Ukraine is striking deep into Russia. I mean, the first point, absolutely, we can do this, and nobody thought. I mean, I think members of the military think tank RUSI and others have said over the last few days, we didn't conceive this. If somebody had said a year ago that Ukraine was going to strike the Omsk oil refinery 1,500 miles to the front line, I think everybody, including myself, would have said that's just not possible. So it's a demonstration of military power. It's also a demonstration or reflection that actually Ukraine's hit a hell of a lot of oil refineries much closer to the border, and this is a sort of marketplace. Omsk, it's a big oil refinery. It would appear to be untouchable. So much so that Russia didn't even put any air defense to protect it. Such an important thing. Now we understand that Ukraine has destroyed 35% of Russia's ability to make petrol, which is why there isn't any. And very significantly, the Russians have just announced they are not exporting any diesel or petrol because they can't. And when you think that that was the lifeblood of the Russian war machine, all the foreign currency they were getting, so that has been cut off. But it seems that it's part of their strategic planning to really hit deep into Russia, so that hitherto the Russian disinformation and propaganda, which is the best in the world, has been shielding the Russian people from what's really going on. Now they just can't do that because anywhere in Russia is now, anywhere up to 2,000 miles into Russia, is now a target for Ukraine. And people are beginning to realize that and getting really concerned. And unless you live in St. Petersburg or Moscow, you're getting even more concerned. But even so, we've seen in the last few weeks that oil refineries in both those capital cities have been hit and targets have been hit. And again, it's not just my words, but Russian bloggers. You just have to look at the Moscow newspapers, and they're sort of questioning, that Putin can no longer protect Moscow, and he certainly can't protect deep inside. And the other issues to this, Russia does have some very effective air defense systems, the S-300s and 400s and 500s, the Pantsir. These are hugely expensive, and at the moment they're firing into the dark. They're firing their $10 million missiles at fleeting targets and generally missing. So, there's a great call at the moment from Putin and some of his close allies to their industry. So, right, we must ramp up. We must build air defense. We must build drones. Well, it's fortunately for the West, the Soviet industrial structure is still the structure that runs Russia, and they just can't do that. Unlike the Ukrainians, who are making 200 FPV-1 drones a day. But overall, we understand from President Zelensky, they're making over 4 million drones a year, and they only need 2 million. Ironically, I expect Russia might try and buy some on the black market, sort of thing. So it's a whole demonstration of the way that Ukraine has really developed this new way of warfare, this drone warfare, and this attacking deep strategic strikes in the rear, which would be absolutely part of NATO's battle plans. But I wouldn't have thought NATO at the moment has the amount of drones and capability to do what Ukraine's doing. But that's very much, I mean, certainly my writing in newspapers over the last few weeks have been, we need to be able to replicate the way that the Ukraine Security Service, the SBU, operates these deep strikes, the clinical strikes as well to degrade, the Russians. We are all learning, and it is very clear that Ukraine is getting firmly on the front foot. And I think for all of those who've followed this war for well over 4.5 years, one just gets the feeling that the tide is really turning towards the Ukrainians. And at last, we have hope that they may well get that just peace that they deserve. Russia's strategy is absolutely having to change. We know already that Russia's taken a lot of key air defense assets off the front line, the Pantsir air defense missiles and launchers back to Moscow predominantly. And, it might be some Western propaganda that Putin's just using them to defend his many palaces around the country. But it's very clear that absolutely the air defenses on the front line are virtually nothing. They're all protecting St. Petersburg and Moscow, and now there is a call from everybody to protect, deep into Russia. But Russia can't do that. Russia's such a vast country and has so many places that there is no way it can protect it. And the way that Ukraine's flying hundreds of drones a night, the idea is if 80% of them get shot down and 20% get through, you are still achieving what you're achieving. And it doesn't seem any way that Russia can counter that. And the Russian Putin and the Russian press are saying, oh, we must make more and more of this stuff. Well, it's not stuff that you can just make overnight. And because of the very antiquated Soviet-style Russian industry, it just doesn't work like that. The innovation and speed that we're seeing in Ukraine is a surprise to us here in the UK and across Western Europe. Everybody is amazed how they can do this. But, it is an existential threat to Ukraine. Everybody in Ukraine is fundamentally involved in the war, which is why they're doing it. If you look at a scenario with Britain where we've got an army of 70,000, trying to build a conventional deterrence, if the whole country of 70 million was involved, you can then see how you can, ramp up innovation, ramp up capability, and build things. But Russia is just failing at doing that. So, yeah, I don't think there's much air defense left on the front lines now. And it's clear that Russia is running out of options, and there seem to be murmurings that Putin wants to start talking peace, which is a good thing, and we all would welcome that. But peace in 2026, July 2026 is a very different perspective than peace 12 months ago for the Russians. They are very much on the back foot now, but they were probably on the front foot a year ago.